So I remember the story of Jonah from my Sunday school class when I was a kid. Or rather, like so many stories we find in the Bible, I was told some version of it that inevitably got confused in popular culture and where the point of the story ends up getting entirely missed. Even today, most biblical commentaries, because I know you all sit at home and read biblical commentaries, seem to think that the story of Jonah is this sort of comic, tragic narrative about what happens if you disobey God. And when I was a child in Sunday school, that was definitely the message, right? Obey God, and by extension, teachers and pretty much every adult, or anyone who is older, bigger, stronger than you, or you're going to end up swallowed by the whale. That was the message. Except it wasn't a whale. It was a fish. If you leave here today knowing anything, I want you to remember it was a fish. I don't know. As has been my habit when I go back to a story that I thought I knew, I find out that I was terribly misinformed, or maybe I just misunderstood, or perhaps with new eyes, a beginner's mind. I find these stories to be much more interesting and much less about things like obedience. As a prophetic book, so Jonah is found in the part of the Hebrew Bible known, sometimes known as the latter prophets. Go home, you can look it up. So it's a prophetic book. So Jonah is honestly, it's kind of weird. It's a weird book to be stuck in the prophets section. Because most of our prophetic writings in the Hebrew Bible particularly, are these long poetic oracles. An oracle is just the word we use to describe the proclamations of a prophet. These long poetic oracles. But Jonah isn't. The book of Jonah, it's a story, it's a narrative. And interestingly, Jonah only makes one prophetic comment in the whole story. So I'm guessing for many of us in the room this morning, it's been a while since you actually read the book of Jonah, if you've read it at all. Nah, that's okay. No shame. I haven't actually read all the Harry Potter books, and I still have never read a Stephen King novel, so whatever. Well, you haven't read Jonah. Anyway, let me tell you, just sort of get you back to the basics of the story. So there's this guy named Jonah. He is the son of a man named Amittai. That's only important if you know what Amittai references, which is the word means faithful or my truth, which I kind of love that. So Jonah hears the voice of Yahweh, God, right, who tells him to go to a city named Nineveh and warn them that their wickedness has drawn God's notice and they're in big trouble. Okay, so to orient you geographically here, this is pretty interesting because Nineveh is in Assyria, which is now Iraq, okay? And the Assyrians had spent a whole lot of time coming in to the northern kingdom of Israel and attacking them. Many raids. So they really weren't part of God's covenant with the Israelites. They were more like enemies. But nonetheless, God says, Jonah, go there and cry out against the city. So Jonah gets up, and he hauls his butt down to the port of Joppa, which is near Tel Aviv, and books passage on a boat to Tarshish, which was probably somewhere in southern Spain, the exact opposite direction than what Yahweh had told him to go. So, Israel, he's supposed to go over here. Well, put it this way. Over here to Syria, and he comes over here, and he's going to go over here across the entire Mediterranean. how that goes. So he gets on the boat, he goes down in the hold, and he falls asleep. I love that part too. And so God sends out a great wind upon the sea, the story says, a massive storm, and the ship is coming close to being broken apart. And the sailors of the ship were absolutely terrified, certain that they were all about to die. And they called to each other to pray for mercy, every man to his God. And here I just have this little speculation, suspicion that these were Unitarian Universalist sailors. Open to any God who would calm this damn storm, pray to whomever you kneel down to. That's not in the commentaries, but, maybe. So they're all on deck, rushing around, praying to their gods, trying to steady the ship in the storm. And the captain goes down into the ship and finds Jonah asleep and cries out, "What do you mean, O sleeper? Arise, call upon your God. It may be the God that will think upon us, and we will not die." Just a side note, if you're ever perusing the Bible, there's a lot of stories in the Bible of somebody being asleep and having to be woken up. And I only mention that because our mission is to be a community that invites people to awaken to love. Anyway. The sailors cast lots. They cast lots. They draw straws to determine whose God is doing this to them. I love this part, right? And it turns out it's Jonah's. He draws the short one. And so they're like, who's your God? And he tells them about Yahweh and that he was running away from God. And the sailors say, okay, fine. What do we do? How do we appease this Yahweh dude? And Jonah says, just throw me into the ocean. Throw me into the sea. Kill me now. And the sailors, again, maybe you use, thought that seems kind of extreme. And so let's try something else. Let's try rowing back to shore. But after a very long fight, it doesn't work. They can't get anywhere. So to their great concern and consternation, they throw Jonah overboard. And instantly the sea calms. And the sailors were all like, huh? That worked? Really? And so then they began offering praise and sacrifice to a God they hadn't heard of an hour ago. In the meantime, the story says that God prepared a great fish to swallow up Jonah for 3 days and 3 nights, as we heard from our friend Bibi this morning. Then Jonah is vomited out back onto dry land. And honestly, back in Sunday school, that was kind of the end of the story. But guess what? That's not the end of the story. The story keeps going. And so he goes to Nineveh. Jonah does. And Jonah begins to proclaim to Nineveh, and this is his only prophecy, and it's short. He says, basically, in 40 days, Nineveh shall be overthrown. That's it. That's all he says. Stinking like fish. A foreigner in this town, the town of his enemy, walks in, says, in 40 days, Nineveh shall be overthrown. Which really isn't much of a prophecy. It's not much to go on. But for whatever reason, the Ninevites believed him, and it resonated with them. And everyone from the king on down, including all the animals in town, does the whole sackcloth and ashes thing and repented of their evil and violence. And so this gives God pause, and God decides not to destroy Nineveh and to show mercy and grace and loving kindness. And Jonah, he's kind of pissed off. He's like, whoa, hold up now, what? You're not going to smite or smote them? I was expecting a smiting, a plague or something. You're just going to let them all off the hook? I run away once, and you have me swallowed by a fish. You leave me there for 3 days and then have me vomited out. I still stink of fish and probably will be forever. And you just change your mind on these Assyrians because they say they're sorry? I mean, putting the sheep and cattle in sackcloth was kind of funny, but seriously? Just kill me now. Just kill me now. Jonah's had it, right? Jonah has had it. He is done. He is so over it. He just wants to die, and he goes outside the city to watch and to wait. And it's really hot. It's Assyria. It's Iraq, right? It's really hot. So he's sitting there sweating, stewing, angry. And that night, God makes this gourd. I told you the story's weird, right? Okay, so he makes this gourd grow overnight. And Jonah, it says, uses it for shade. And so, I don't know, this is my brain. I think he makes a gourd hat. The big gourd on his head. So he's sitting there in his gourd hat, still mad, still hot, a little bit in the shade. And then the next night, God sends a worm. And I love this. The worm smotes the gourd. The only thing that gets smote in this entire story is a gourd. And so the next day, Jonah, without his gourd hat for shade, passes out in the sun, and again, just asks to die. And God says, "Are you mad about the gourd?" And Jonah basically says, "Yeah, I'm mad about the gourd. Just let me die." And God says, "It's interesting that you have such strong feelings about this gourd that you did not labor or grow for yourself. It just arrived one night and was gone the next. But somehow I should not have strong feelings for Nineveh and the 120,000 human beings who just don't know their right hand from their left or their cattle." And guess what, friends? That's the end of the story. You get to the end of the story, you're like, wait, what? Huh? What just happened? What just happened? So friends, I don't think this story has anything to do with faithfulness or obedience. Not really. I mean, kind of, but yeah, not really. Jonah is often accused as being unfaithful or disobedient. He's contrasted with the other characters mentioned in the story, like his dad, whose name is Amittai, meaning faithful. The sailors on the ship, immediately after the storm is calmed, they convert to worshiping Yahweh. And the Ninevites, with barely a warning, in Hebrew, by the way, his entire prophecy, this warning, is 5 words. And with those 5 words, the Ninevites completely repent their past wrongdoings. So I don't think it's about faithfulness, really. I think this is a story about what happens when we resist the call of love. The story is about us. We are, so often, Jonah. So I want you to do this for me. I want you to just imagine in your mind, this probably won't take you long, to consider, to think about a time in your life that you knew what you were being asked to do was the right thing, aligned with your core values, with your very heart's beating. Now, this could be one of these big thing, major life changes, a career, family, partner, whatever. Or it may be just a smaller thing. Maybe it's just a difficult conversation you need to have, or volunteering for help, or doing something outside your normal comfort zone. Think of a time when it felt downright scary to follow through on what you knew to be the right thing, the good thing, the awakened to love thing. A time when you literally, or perhaps figuratively, ran away from that. A time when you perhaps desperately said, even sarcastically, "Just kill me now." Or maybe you're not nearly that dramatic, but have cultivated great skills in distracting yourself from the risky work of following your deepest values, your deepest love, because you know that it might just change your life. And hey, your life's pretty good as it is. What do I need to completely overthrow that for? So I don't think that Jonah is unfaithful or disobedient per se. I think he knows exactly what he's being asked to do. He's being called to go into the city of his enemy, people who have attacked and killed his own people, and threaten them. And he's being asked to do this alone, right? I'd imagine he runs through the rehearsals in his head, because we do this, right? We run through all the rehearsals on how this was going to go. And I bet none of those imagined scenarios turned out well for him. At best, the best scenario for him is he's going to look ridiculous. He's going to be laughed at, ignored. That's at best. He's going to be the crazy guy on the corner with the bullhorn in 40 days. And everybody walks around him, pretends like he's not saying anything, right? That's the best scenario. At worst, well, whatever. So he runs away. He does everything he can to avoid the one thing he knows he needs to do, but that one thing is far too scary, too much of a risk to who he knows himself to be. But the risk of failure isn't even the scariest part, right? The risk of success is. Because he probably senses that the possibility of success is too potentially transforming. What if he actually goes? And what if they actually say yes? What does that mean for him? That's a scary place to be. And I love the fact, by the way, I said this before, that he falls asleep on the boat. Right? In the middle of the storm. It's a great strategy, friends. I know it's a great strategy because it's what I do. When everyone else is freaking out and the whole world seems to be crashing out, just go to sleep. Ignore the obvious. I do this when I get really stressed. I like to sleep. I like to think that when I wake, whatever has been going on will have resolved itself. It usually hasn't. But at least I'm well rested. Jonah eventually wakes up. He's made aware of his actions or his inactions and have now begun to imperil others. And so he surrenders. But interestingly, not to his call. He surrenders his life. Asked to be tossed overboard. Friends, I think that the call of love, what love asks us to do every day, can be so overwhelming that all of Jonah's actions make complete sense to me. They are all acts of resistance to a deep, powerful, transformational change. I get so comfortable with life. We keep everything more or less precariously balanced. And even when we sense inside ourselves that who we are isn't quite who we intend ourselves to be, who we are meant to be, the risk of living into that is so great that we think it's easier to give up. But then comes the fish. The fish prepared to protect us. The fish ordered to hold us close, maybe to let us glimpse at what our non-being might be like, might feel like. The fish asked to hold us, to give us the pause, to pray, to remember what our heart's deepest yearnings truly are. The fish to remind us that if we are able, that if we are to be who we say we are, we must give ourselves over to the task ahead. Even if we fail, even if it doesn't go as planned, even if we make mistakes, even if, and especially if, what happens when we take the risk isn't what we thought. Eventually, Jonah takes the risk, right? He goes to Nineveh, warns them, and then he gets ticked off that God doesn't destroy Nineveh, doesn't follow through. But I think that down deep in Jonah's heart, if he were to really listen to what is in his heart, he knows the goal wasn't to destroy Nineveh, it was to transform them. It was to transform them from brokenness to wholeness, from oppression to power, from unjust to just, from separateness to relationship, from isolation to beloved community. And the challenge for Jonah, the challenge for us, for me and you, is to have the courage, the heart-opening, heart-breaking, heart-healing courage to move, to act in the face of all of those doubts and fears, to listen deeply to our heart's call, even when, or especially when, we don't really understand what it's calling us to. Perhaps it's to give voice to the voiceless. Not only the voiceless in our society, but to give voice to love, because love has no other voice than the one you give it. Or perhaps it's to embody justice and peace. Perhaps. But these are the tasks of we prophets. Listen attentively, speak fearlessly, center ourselves in love, and let love tell us who we are and how we become fully human. Our prophetic work doesn't always do what we intend, and yet still our task is to engage this life, our call to love, as one roll of a wave in a constantly moving sea, knowing perhaps that God doesn't even know where the waves will land. So my invitation to us today, wherever you find yourself in this call to be prophets of love, whether you're running away, or asleep in the hold, or in the belly of the fish, or angry with the results. Return again, my friends. Return again to the courage of your heart. Know that your heart's yearning is the voice of love within you. Listen. Take courage. Then go. Amen, my friends. And I love you. And may we live in blessing.